And good morning. How's everyone doing today? Dr. Chris Roddenberry coming to you from the University of Rijeka in Croatia. Everybody doing all right? Good to see you. Thanks for coming. It is absolutely fantastic to have you. Today we're going to be talking about Chapter 3, Sleeping and Dreaming. As I suggested to you on Tuesday, sleeping and dreaming is a very distinct and interesting type of consciousness that you go through every day of your life. And it's very important for your physical health as well as your psychological health. If you're in the audience, go ahead and give me a shout out and let me know that you are with me today. I see we have a couple of people in the audience. I've got my tea. I'm excited. And I am ready to talk about sleeping and dreaming. Good morning, Jennifer. Thanks for coming today. Fantastic person. Are you sure, Finn?
Yes.
Okay. I think I'm annoying other people in the library today, so I may have to find a different place to be soon, okay? Okay. She's a very nice person over there in the audience, so that's good. She's unfortunately going to have to listen to me talk about psychology today. Ugh, right? Okay. So let's go. Excuse me. I hit the wrong buttons. Sometimes I do that. My fingers get a little excited. All right, so let's talk a little bit about sleeping and waking. You know, human beings' lives are guided by this thing called a circadian rhythm. A circadian rhythm is a 24-hour cycle of changing consciousness that we all go through. So we're all awake during the day, and then we all get sleepy at night and go to sleep, and then we wake up in the morning and start our cycle all over again. So this circadian rhythm is a 24-hour cycle and this 24-hour cycle controls a lot of biological processes of the human, including sleeping and waking. You may or may not know this, but the hormones that are produced in your body vary from hour to hour during the day. Your cortisol levels change based upon the time of day. Did you know your body temperature changes based on the time of the day? Your body temperature drops at night right before you go to sleep, and your body temperature increases right before you wake up in the morning. Urine production is actually controlled by the time of day. And of course, your level of arousal is controlled by the time of day. So your body is on this cycle that causes different changes to occur throughout the day that maximizes your resources based upon what you need to do. Now, if you remember, we've been talking about the biological structures in the brain and what they do. And sleeping and waking is no difference. It is controlled by a brain structure. So what we're going to talk about today is these three structures: the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the pineal gland, and the pons. Okay? The suprachiasmatic nucleus is located in your hypothalamus. See the picture right over there. It's just a little group of neurons right in the bottom of your hypothalamus. And did you know that this suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN, has some nerve fibers that go all the way to your eye, and it receives light input. During the day, when the sun is out, these nerve fibers shut your suprachiasmatic nucleus off. But at night, when the sun goes down and you don't have any more light coming into your eyes, the suprachiasmatic nucleus becomes active, and it communicates with the pineal gland, located a little farther back in your hypothalamus, and it causes the pineal gland to produce melatonin at night, which aids in the sleeping process. Okay? Now, it turns out that if you destroy the suprachiasmatic nucleus, you lose your circadian rhythm completely. Just like the baby that sleeps at weird times and gets up at weird times, if you didn't have a suprachiasmatic nucleus, you wouldn't have a 24-hour cycle of sleeping and waking. All right? Now, the pineal gland as I said, produces melatonin at night when the suprachiasmatic nucleus directs it to. In fact, if you've ever had sleep troubles before, your doctor may have told you to get yourself some melatonin to help you sleep at night. You know, I'm actually still suffering from jet lag, traveling all the way over here to Croatia, and so I probably could use some melatonin to help me get to sleep at night as well. Now, another structure located below the hypothalamus, down there in your brain stem, is called the pons. And your pons is actually very important for relaxing your muscles at night during REM sleep. I don't know if you know this, but at night during REM sleep, you dream. And if you've ever had those dreams, you know you've been chased by monsters and you run and you try to fight them off. Well, if you didn't have a pons, you would actually thrash about and move your arms and your legs. But your pons actually paralyzes you at night while you're sleeping. Have any of you ever had this experience where you wake up and you're paralyzed for just a second? Have you ever had that experience? If you have, you probably woke up during a REM dream and your pons was a little bit slow in turning itself off. So you woke up and you felt paralyzed for a second or two. So for the exam, I want you to be familiar with these three structures: your suprachiasmatic nucleus, which gives you a 24-hour cycle of sleeping and waking; your pineal gland, which produces a hormone that helps you sleep at night; and your pons, which is responsible for paralyzing your muscles while you dream. Do you have any questions so far, Jennifer? Probably. By the way, can you hear me well enough? Jennifer, how's the sound? It's a little bit echoey in this room, and I can hear echoes in my own ear. I'm hoping that the sound comes through clear for you. Can you, in fact, hear it? Okay. Now, what I'd like to talk to you about is the electrical activity that is generated by your brain. Cool, fantastic. That's what I want to hear, Jennifer. Now, if you'll remember from chapter 2, I told you that your brain generates little pulses of electricity called action potentials. And if you put millions and millions of these action potentials together, what you're going to see is electrical activity generated by the brain. And you can actually measure this electrical activity. Interesting historical fact, the electroencephalogram, the EEG machine, was actually invented by a Nazi scientist named Hans Berger, who was actually looking for psychic energy. And he accidentally discovered that the brain produces electrical activity. Now, the first types of waves that Hans Berger identified, he named alpha waves. And alpha waves is the kind of electrical activity that your brain generates when you are relaxed. If you've ever sat around not thinking about anything, just kind of hanging out at the beach with nothing on your mind in particular, your brain is going to generate these alpha waves. And if you'll look over here to the left, you'll see sort of a graphical picture of these alpha waves. Now, what Hans Berger didn't understand at first was that the brain actually generates different types of electricity. And the different types are differ based upon how high up and down the waves go. We'll call that the amplitude of the waves, and how close the waves are together, which is called the wavelength. All right? And what he realized was that when he had people engaged in thinking activities like you're doing right now, you're paying attention to my lecture, trying to understand what I'm saying, your brain is generating beta waves. When you're taking a test, when you're involved in an intense discussion, when you're trying to understand a psychology lecture, your brain is generating these beta waves. And beta waves have lower amplitude and smaller wavelengths. They're more jagged. They represent focused attention, okay? Now, if you've ever laid on the couch at night watching TV and your eyes kind of begin to close and you start to get sleepy and drift in and out of consciousness, your brain starts to generate theta waves. And if you look at the picture over here, you'll notice that the theta waves have bigger wavelengths. They're a little bit bigger, and they also have higher amplitude. This represents slower electrical activity in the brain. Now, researchers who studied sleep found that when people actually go to sleep at night and they finally truly fall asleep, their brain begins to generate these things called sleep spindles and K complexes. And if you look at, in the picture over here, if you look at column D or row D, you will notice examples of sleep spindles, little bursts of electrical activity, and these K complexes, which are bigger bursts of electrical activity. Okay? The neat thing is, if you were in light sleep and I came up and whispered your name in your ear, you might not wake up, but your brain would generate a K complex and a sleep spindle, telling me that somebody in your brain heard your name when I said it. Okay? And then at night, when you are really, really deep asleep, I don't know if you've ever been like at 2 or 3 in the morning when you're super duper asleep, your brain generates these delta waves. And that's over here in this picture in row E. And notice the delta waves. They have much higher amplitude. They go way up and way down. And they also have longer wavelengths from wave peak to wave peak. You'll notice, and that represents a brain that is super duper asleep. Now, if you look all the way down in row F, you will see what's known as beta waves again, but they're occurring during REM sleep. Did you know that when your brain is dreaming at night, it is just as active as if you were up taking a test or focused in a deep, intense discussion? These are called delta waves, all right? So, if you think about it, during the course of the day, depending upon what you're doing and the time of day, your brain's going to change the hormones that it's producing, the body temperature that it's producing, and the kind of electrical activity that is occurring in your brain. Okay? I know I'm bothering these people. I know I am. They're so cool. All right, so the important things about the chart. I do want you to know that the different types of electrical activity will change based upon the time of day. Now, take a look at this chart right underneath me. During the night, when we fall asleep, our brain's electrical activity is going to change in a pattern. And this pattern is going to be repeated 5 or 6 times during the night. What I'd like to do is describe this chart right underneath me and kind of explain to you how the brain activity changes during the night. Okay? Now, let's look at the x-axis along the bottom of this chart. You'll notice we have hour 0 all the way to hour 8. Let's assume that you went to bed and slept 8 hours during the night. If you're like me, you probably don't get 8 hours of sleep at night, but let's assume you did, right? What you're going to see is that the electrical activity in your brain is going to change in a very rhythmic, cyclical pattern throughout the night. So let's follow this person here in this chart. We'll call her Finney. How about that? We'll say this is Finney's brain changing during the night, okay? Now, when Finney falls asleep at hour 0, what you're going to see is her brain activity is going to start changing. At first, her brain is going to start generating beta waves. Now, here in theta waves. Now, she's in what we call stage 1. Stage 1 is actually not true sleep. That's somewhere between being awake and being asleep. That's kind of when you're laying on the couch and you can still hear the TV and you're not quite asleep, right? But if Finney were to lay on that couch for about 10 minutes, her brain would start generating these K complexes and these sleep spindles. And we would know that she is truly asleep. She's in what we call stage 2 sleep or light sleep. Now, it's really easy to wake you up during light sleep. And it turns out human beings spend about 50% of their time at night in light sleep. So Then he started out sort of laying in front of the TV, sort of somewhere between awake and asleep. And then she went into light sleep. And you'll notice that she is now at about hour 1/2. And you'll see that her brain activity on the y-axis is now slipped into stage 2 or light sleep. Now, if she was to keep sleeping for another 15 or 20 minutes, her brain activity, the electrical activity in her brain would change again, and it would start generating delta waves, those big, slow waves. And that would tell you that her brain's activity has really started to slow down. All right? Now, your book's going to talk about stage 3 and stage 4 sleep. Don't worry about the distinction. They're both called delta sleep. Psychologists differ between stage 3 and stage 4 based on the amount of brain activity that is composed of delta waves. But all I want you to know is that delta sleep or deep sleep is when you are super duper asleep at night and you are hard to wake up. If you've ever been woken up by somebody when you're in delta sleep, you're probably kind of confused for a couple of minutes. You may not know where you are or what the person is saying to you. You're trying to figure out where you are. You are in delta sleep. You know, the interesting thing about delta sleep is that's when people are most likely to engage in sleepwalking or sleep talking. A lot of people think that you talk and walk when you are dreaming at night. Absolutely not true. You are actually in delta sleep when you are sleepwalking and sleep talking. Now, another interesting thing about deep sleep or delta sleep is when you get into your 50s, when you're starting to get my age, your brain's going to have trouble generating delta wave activity during your sleep cycle. You're not going to get as much deep sleep. And what you'll find is that starting in the 50s, at my age, people are going to start to report difficulty sleeping. Your grandparents and your parents probably complain that they have trouble sleeping at night. That's because they're not getting into delta sleep as well. Okay? Now, let's look at this chart down here and look at what Finney's doing. So she sort of fell a little bit asleep. She was in stage 1 watching TV and her eyes were opening and closing. And then she went into stage 2 or light sleep. Then her brain's electrical activity slowed down and she went into delta sleep. Now, after about an hour and a half, her brain activity is going to start reverting back to theta waves and K complexes, and she's going to come back into stage 2 sleep. Her brain's going to start to become more active. And if that happens for too long and she doesn't wake up, her brain activity is then going to change. And if you measure her activity, it's going to look like she's wide awake taking a chemistry exam. But she's not taking a chemistry exam. She's instead gone into what we call delta sleep. Delta sleep. REM sleep. All right? And you'll notice that we've cycled all the way down from being awake all the way down into deep sleep. And now our brain activity's changed and we're back and our brain looks like it's awake as if we were up in the day having a party or studying for a test. But she's actually super asleep. And if you tried to wake her up during REM sleep, she would still be just as confused and just as disoriented as if she was in deep sleep. And what she's probably going to be during REM sleep is dreaming. We do most of our dreaming during REM sleep. Now, not all of our dreaming occurs during REM sleep, but most of it does. And if you've ever had one of those really scary chili burrito dreams, man, where a monster is chasing you, trying to kill you, and you are super duper scared, you're having what we would call a REM dream. Now, remember, as I told you from the last chart that we were on, while you're in REM sleep, this little structure called the locus coeruleus located in your pons paralyzes the rest of your body so that your body can't move while you're dreaming. Because your brain is just as awake as if you were fighting that monster during the day. And the areas of your brain are trying to move you, but your pons paralyzes you so that you can't kick around and hurt anybody. Now, let's look at this chart over the course of the 8 hours and let's notice what happens to Finney. She is going to cycle back and forth between REM sleep and non-REM sleep probably 5 to 6 times during the night. And so you'll notice that she goes down into deep sleep at 1 hour, and then the second hour she engages in REM sleep. And then she goes back down into non-REM sleep for another couple of hours, and then she comes back up into REM sleep again, and then down into non-REM sleep and back up into REM sleep, down into non-REM sleep and back up into REM sleep. And you'll notice that she cycles back and forth between REM sleep and non-REM sleep 5 to 6 times during the night. Okay? Now, if you look at this chart, I do want you to notice one other unique feature about this electrical activity. Notice that she gets most of her deep sleep, most of her delta sleep, in the first 4 hours of her sleep cycle. And she does most of her dreaming in the last 4 hours of her sleep cycle. Now, you're only going to remember a dream if you wake up during REM sleep. So if you're the kind of person that says, I don't dream at night, that's not true. What happens is you happen to wake up during non-REM sleep. The dreams and visions that you see while you're dreaming at night disappear really, really quickly. I don't know if you've ever had this experience where you have a dream and you want to tell your friend or your roommate or your mom, and by the time you get out of bed and go all the way to talk to that person, you've forgotten the dream that you were going to tell them. Have you ever had that experience, Jennifer? Okay, so that's what I want you to know for this slide. We cycle back and forth between REM and non-REM sleep 5 to 6 times a night. We get most of our delta sleep during the early part of our sleep cycle and do most of our dreaming during the back half of our sleep cycle. And as we get older, remember I said your brain finds it harder and harder to get into what we call slow wave or delta sleep. All right, let's talk a little bit about REM sleep. It's actually known as paradoxical sleep. A paradox is a puzzle, right? And REM sleep is very puzzling because your brain is almost more awake than it is during your normal waking day. Your brain is incredibly active, even though you are incredibly sleepy, all right? And so that's why we call it paradoxical sleep. Now, what you're going to notice is that different parts of your brain are active during REM sleep. So, and the activity changes. So if you look at the brain, underneath me, you're going to see that your motor cortex, the part that moves your body, is very, very active while you're dreaming. And your occipital lobe, where your visual center and your visual association cortices are going to be very, very active. And that's why when you're dreaming at night, you're seeing scary things and you're running around, because the part of your brain that sees things and the part of your brain that moves you is hyperactive. But if you've ever been in a dream, you'll notice that your dreams don't make a bit of sense. They're incredibly confusing and weird. And that's because your frontal lobe, the part of your brain that makes sense out of things for you, is less active, And then finally, I want you to notice that your brainstem is very active during REM sleep. And that's the part of your brain that is paralyzing you from neck down so that you don't kick and thrash about when you sleep at night. Now, Jennifer, have you ever spent an all night awake? Have you ever pulled an all-nighter to study for an exam? Have you ever just stayed out late with friends and just forgotten to go to bed? If you'll notice, when it finally gets morning time, you're not as tired anymore, and you may stay up 2 days in a row. Now, the neat thing is, when you sleep the next night, you don't have to double up on your sleep. So if I miss 8 hours of sleep, I don't have to sleep 16 hours the next night. You don't have to do that. However, your brain will spend twice as much time in REM sleep as it did the night before. as it usually does. And that's because although your brain doesn't need to catch up on the sleep it misses, it only needs to catch up on the REM sleep it misses. And we call this tendency to double up on your REM sleep, we call it REM rebound. And here's a neat thing, Jennifer. If I was to keep you up for 6 or 7 days and not let you go to sleep, as soon as you fell asleep, you would fall straight into REM sleep. You wouldn't even go into light sleep. You wouldn't even go into deep sleep. You would just fall immediately into REM sleep. Okay? That's called REM rebound. Now, what happens during REM sleep? It's an altered state of consciousness. Now, as I suggested to you, dreaming occurs primarily during REM sleep, though not always. I will tell you, though, that REM dreams are the vivid ones, the visual ones, and the ones that really scare you, okay? Research has shown that when people dream, or non-REM dreams tend to be a little less visual, a little less vivid, and not quite as scary as our REM dreams. Now, why do we dream? Nobody knows why we dream. Nobody knows exactly why we dream. Now, if you've ever sat in an introductory psych class before, you've probably been told there about this fellow named Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud thought people dreamed so that they could live out their desires at night. So Sigmund Freud thought that we all had these desires and unnatural things that we wanted to do that were really bad. And what he thought was when we sleep at night, what we do is our brain allows us to live out these impulses in the privacy of our own mind. So Freud would say that dreams are just a way of getting out our subconscious desires. On the other hand, Rosalind Cartwright and other psychologists have suggested that maybe REM dreams are just sort of a way of thinking outside of the box. Have you ever heard of thinking outside of the box is a really unique and creative way to solve problems? Okay, so Rosalind Cartwright and her colleagues think that human brains engage in out-of-the-box problem solving when they are in REM sleep. I've heard several stories. Robert Louis Stevenson supposedly had the idea for his book, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, while he was dreaming. Did you know that Einstein dreamed, he thought up the theory of relativity when he was dreaming about a train coming into the station? And you know what my personal favorite? I heard that Keith Richards dreamed up Jumpin' Jack Flash, the guitar riff for the very famous song Jumpin' Jack Flash, while he was having a dream as well. So some people think that our brain is solving problems when we're sleeping during REM sleep at night. Now, the hypothesis, the theory that I think is most accurate, although, like I said, nobody has any proof, the one I think is that is what's called the activation synthesis theory of dreaming. Your brain is just dreaming of these really weird, when you're sleeping at night, your brain is active. All of these different memories and associations are being generated in your brain, and your brain tries to put them together in a way to make sense, right? So let's say you were in school today, and when you were at the snack machine getting a candy bar, right, somebody asked you, hey, would you like to go whitewater rafting this weekend? And so a little bit later during that day, you called your mom to ask her for money to go whitewater rafting, and she told you that you needed to spend more time studying and less time having fun. So then you go to sleep at night, and all of a sudden these three unrelated images pop up: a Snickers bar, whitewater rafting, and your mom yelling at you. And your brain puts all these together, and suddenly you are rafting down a river on a Snickers bar with your mom behind you, right? So nobody knows why we dream, but here are three theories which might explain why this happens. Okay? Now, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how your sleep changes across the lifespan. Okay? So changes in REM sleep and changes in deep sleep across the lifespan. our sleep pattern does change as we grow older. Did you know that while the average adult sleeps somewhere between 6 and 8 hours a day, infants, newborn infants, sleep about 16 hours a day. 16 hours a day. So they sleep twice as much as adults do. And not only do that, they do that, instead of 25% of their dreams being REM sleep, infants spend about 50% of their time in REM sleep. We think REM sleep is important for learning and creating neural connections in the brain, so it would make sense that infants spend all that time in REM sleep because they have so much to learn, right? They have to learn how to move their arms and move their legs and talk, and they have so much to learn. And you can look at this chart underneath and you'll see the difference in infants from 1 to 15 days. They spend 16 hours of sleep, and almost half that is in the pink REM sleep. And then as you move through life, you'll notice that the amount of sleep and the amount of time in REM sleep is going to decrease. And there in about the adulthood, you're going to go to your average sleep time of about 8 hours, with about 25% of your sleep in REM sleep. You'll notice that. And then you'll look right here as we get into middle and late adulthood, our need for sleep drops even a little bit more. And your 50 and 60-year-old people probably spend only about 6 hours a day sleeping, okay? Now, let's see, as you'll notice down here at the bottom of this chart, I say that deep sleep begins to disappear in the late 50s. So if you were to measure your grandparents' brain during their sleep cycle, they wouldn't be generating any delta waves. And because they can't get into deep sleep, what you're going to see is that half of all adults 50 and older are going to report having difficulty getting to sleep and staying asleep. And that's why when you go to your grandparents' house, shh, you got to be quiet at night because you don't want to wake them up, okay? Now, let's talk briefly about some problems, some sleep disorders. Now, good sleep is essential, but what you're going to find is a lot of people have difficulties in sleep. We call these parasomnias, difficulties with sleep, sleep problems. So, and you will know when we get to clinical psychology and we talk about psychological disorders, what you're going to notice is difficulty sleeping is a very common feature of most psychological disorders. People who are anxious, people who are depressed, people who are schizophrenic, most of these people are going to have difficulty sleeping at night. All right, let's talk about 5 different sleep disorders I want you to be familiar with. Now, you probably know insomnia. You've heard of that. There's sleep onset insomnia, which is difficulty getting to sleep. And then there is sleep interruption insomnia, which is where you wake up a bunch of times during the night and you just have trouble staying asleep. If you lay in bed at night trying to get to sleep for more than 15 or 20 minutes, you may have insomnia. Okay, 12 to 20% of adults suffer from insomnia. It's associated with depression. And you know, the worst thing you can do is worry about trying to get to sleep. That will actually make the insomnia worse. Now, some people take pills, sleeping pills at night to help them get to sleep. But I would argue that is not a good thing to do because these medications are very addictive. And they don't work for a long time. They don't work forever. So you can actually get into trouble trying to get yourself to sleep at night. I don't know if any of you remember the famous star, Michael Jackson. He actually died taking pills to help him get to sleep at night. The most effective therapy for insomnia is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is where your doctor helps you learn how not to worry about getting to sleep, and that actually helps you get to sleep. All right? Now, second kind of sleep disorder is sleep apnea. Okay. You know, my second class I'll teach out here if it would help. Okay. Okay. You know what? When I come back on Tuesday, I'm gonna buy you coffee while I'm teaching, okay? So I'll bring donuts and coffee for you. Okay. I've just disturbed these people in my class. I feel so terrible. Sleep apnea. My father suffers from sleep apnea right now. It's most common in middle-aged men, and it's actually associated with being overweight too. And what happens is when you're asleep at night, your throat will close, and you'll have what's known as obstructive sleep apnea. And you're not getting enough oxygen into your body. Now, there's this structure in your brainstem, the medulla oblongata, and what happens is that part of your brain measures the amount of oxygen in your bloodstream. And if you don't have enough oxygen in your bloodstream, your medulla will cause you to wake up. And what you'll do is you'll wake up, take a breath, and go back to sleep. And the crazy thing is, some people will actually wake up hundreds of times a night without realizing. And these people have trouble getting REM sleep at night, and so they wake up during the day feeling very sluggish and very tired. They have what's known as sleep apnea. Now, one thing you can do to help yourself avoid sleep apnea is to lose some weight, or as they do for my dad, they give him this mask called a CPAP, and it shoves oxygen down his throat at night, which allows him to remain asleep. Okay? Now, a third disorder is called narcolepsy. If you'll remember from a couple of slides earlier, I told you how your brain smoothly cycles back and forth between REM and non-REM sleep. Here's the deal. People with narcolepsy, their brain, for some reason, doesn't cycle back and forth like normal. And these people don't get REM sleep at night. So what will happen is they'll be awake during the middle of the day, and their brain will automatically switch into REM sleep, and they'll fall immediately asleep. And because your body is paralyzed when you're in REM sleep, these people will often fall down on the ground. And people with severe narcolepsy can't live independent lives. They can't drive a car because they'll fall asleep right in the middle of driving the car. They may have to wear helmets so that they don't hurt their head when they fall asleep. And in fact, in your course resources video, I've got a crazy video about a fellow named Dale Dodd. They call him the sleepy man. And you should watch this guy fall into his narcoleptic fits of sleep. Now, when we do go into REM sleep, as I suggested to you, our pons paralyzes our body so that we don't thrash about. But you know what? Some people's pons doesn't work when they go to sleep. And what these people do is they thrash about and act out their dreams while they're sleeping. And these people can hurt themselves as well as their sleep partners. And they can give you medicine that will actually make this, that will help this condition. And then finally, I did want to mention sleepwalking and sleep talking. These behaviors, these are not problematic behaviors. In fact, they're quite normal for children to occasionally engage in sleepwalking and sleep talking. And I do want you to know that this occurs during delta sleep, not REM sleep. I will even ask you a question about that on the exam to try and trick you. Remember, sleepwalking and sleep talking occurs in delta sleep, not REM sleep. Okay. Well, that's all I had to say today about sleeping and waking. Jennifer, it looks like you're the only person in the class right now. Do you have any questions about sleep that you would like for me to answer while I'm here? If you don't, that's cool. Just remember that you have to do the discussion board tonight by 11:59 p.m. Okay, cool. And remember, the Chapter 3 quiz homework is available tonight by 11:59 p.m. If you don't have any questions, I'm going to go ahead and log off, say goodbye. But I will talk to you next Tuesday in class when we start Chapter 4, Developmental Psychology. You folks take care and have a great day. Bye.